What's going on, everyone? I'm just your average, everyday, atypical Canadian nerd, here to react to your average, everyday American man, here to react to and learn about a video that has to do with Canada and Denmark's disputed border. And in this image, you can see that there is this island. And yes, this island is the disputed border territory between our two nations. There has been a hotly debated and very casual and fun-loving dispute between our two nations over this rock for a very long time. It's got a great story, a great loving rivalry, very friendly. Our two nations very much like each other, and even through this border dispute, we have fun with it. But before we get into that, I just want to declare that I was wrong yesterday, which happens, right? We're not perfect, neither you nor me nor him nor anyone, right? And so we all make mistakes, and it is important for us as people that we admit these mistakes so we can learn and grow and become better people in our eyes and in others' eyes. And so I would like to state that I was wrong yesterday when I boldly stated that the sales tax here in the province of Ontario, which I live, was 15%. I'm wrong. It's 13%. Has been 13% my entire life. Where did I get the idea it was 15% even? I don't know, but that's okay because, hey, this is how we learn. Well, with that out of the way, let's get this picture out of the way. And, but before we do, in the vein of learning, I will be doing a French word of the day near the end of today's video. What is it going to be? I don't know, because I haven't thought that far ahead, which is what the whole point of this series is about. It's about like a live reaction, just off the cuff. And no, I don't have this memorized or researched or scripted. No, this is all just making it up as I go along. And why do I do this? Well, because I think it's funny, and to add some context to whatever videos we are examining here, and to answer questions that Tyler may pose during his reactions, but mostly it's because I think it's funny, and I'm enjoying doing this. And with that out of the way, now we'll get this started.
What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and learn.
React to and learn. About
Canada's unusual border with Denmark. Unusual to say the least.
Yeah.
Canada, Denmark, they're not bordering. Something doesn't add up here.
Yeah, we're not like next to each other. We're not very close to each other. Why does this happen? International waters, and that's kind of why. Maritime law. Yeah.
Doesn't make sense. This video really caught my attention because it doesn't make any sense.
Well, it does when you examine closely the maritime law involved, but mostly this is fun. Like, I love this little rock that we're going to talk about and the story of how it keeps swapping hands back and forth, kinda.
How Canada just got a land border with Denmark. When was this made? This was July 14th. July, August, September, October, 3 months ago.
This video I'm reacting to was filmed 11 months before the video you are now watching, which means that it was in 2022. 2021. I don't know. Math. It's September, so you figure it out. It's probably 2021. Might be 2022. I don't know, and I'm not going to figure that out right now in this moment.
Canada apparently is bordering Denmark. I don't understand how that is a thing, but that's the point.
It's a fun story.
When you don't understand something, you look it up on YouTube and you watch it, as I always say. So,
yes, because everything you see on the internet is real.
So, with that being said, let's check it out.
Last month, the world's geography just changed forever. Canada and Denmark are two totally different nations located thousands of miles apart from one another on different continents separated by the entire Atlantic Ocean.
2022. This happened in 2022. Yeah, I did the math.
But
Yeah.
in one significant way, the two nations share one major geographic similarity. Until
What?
just last month, in June of 2022, they were two of only 17 countries across the world that shared a land border with just a single other country. The other
Oh, really? That's a fun fact. That is a fun fact if ever I heard, and I had fun listening to it. Canada only borders the United States. What does Denmark border? France or something?
others being Brunei's single border with Malaysia, the Dominican Republic and Haiti each bordering the other on the island of Hispaniola, the Gambia that's surrounded by Senegal, the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom each bordering the other on the island of Ireland.
And that is a hotly contested zone right there.
Monaco surrounded by France, Vatican City and San Marino each surrounded by Italy, Lesotho surrounded by South Africa, Papua New Guinea stuck with Indonesia on one island, and Timor-Leste stuck with them on another island, Portugal stuck on the Iberian Peninsula with Spain, Qatar stranded on a peninsula blocked by Saudi Arabia, and South Korea stuck on another peninsula blocked in by North Korea.
Wow.
Until last month, Denmark's only land border was with Germany to their immediate south.
Germany. Dang it. Germany. I should have known that one.
Why? Why would you have known that, Tyler? Why should you have known that? I don't know. Doesn't matter.
You know, it's kind of nice, Canada and the United States being part of that exclusive little club. Although we're not anymore because of Denmark. Hey, that was beautiful for a moment there. Come on. We had a thing going. It was just the two of us.
Well, it was from our perspective here in Canada, but the United States also shares a border with Mexico, right? So, oh, and then there's all of their territories and their enclaves. So no, it was special for us here in Canada, but it was not special for you, Tyler, in the United States.
While Canada's only land borders were with the United States across the south and the west with Alaska. But despite being located thousands of miles away on two different continents, Canada and Denmark are a lot closer than you probably initially thought.
Like, we're emotionally close.
What does that mean? What does that even mean?
Because as of the 11th of June 2022, they each officially border each other by land. And that means that they've each removed themselves from the already small list of countries that only border a single other country.
You can't. Canada, stop it. You're drunk. Go home. You can't just decide to border Denmark like that.
It's more than just a quick decision. It's not like we rushed out one night, got drunk, and said, "Hey, buddy, let's get married," or something like that. It's far more complicated and amusing.
Well, no.
They border each other by land. And
Border each other by land? Huh.
Keep watching, Tyler. You'll get there.
Is this like some kind of temporal space-time rift
No.
we're talking about?
No.
Has space-bending technology allowed this? I don't see any other way.
that
a
only
rock.
border a
It's just a rock.
single other country. But how can a country in Europe and another in North America even border each other by land? Well, it's because their border is a very tiny one and it's located right here in the literal middle of nowhere on a small, barren, uninhabited rock of an island known as Hans Island.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. It's true.
Hans Island. I gotta zoom back out. I gotta see the zoom in again. I don't even know where we're talking about anymore. Very north.
Another in North America even border each other by land. Well, it's because their border is a very tiny one and it's located right here in the literal middle.
What? Isn't that, Greenland up there? Or...
Kinda, yeah. I mean, yeah, but no.
And then, is this technically part of Canada on the left? It is.
That's what we say.
Oh my goodness, the most north of Canada you can possibly even think about getting. You're almost traveling around the Earth at that point.
Yeah, it's a frozen wasteland.
Okay. Hans Island.
Hans Island. Today, Denmark and Canada both split the island roughly 60-40 respectively across a border that's only a tad longer than 1,200 meters.
What?
That's like 1.2 kilometers, roughly.
Why? How? Why? Somehow Canada and Denmark ended up splitting a random island in the middle of nowhere. Okay.
Well, it was better than the fight we had over the island. You know, deciding that we're going to share it is a whole lot more friendly and peaceful than the friendly, peaceful fight we had.
That's why. That's why. Okay.
This is what makes them both technically bordering nations now. But for decades before just last month, the issue of who between them actually owned this insignificant and pointless island was an unresolved territorial dispute that generated one of modern history's friendliest, good-natured, and wackiest conflicts.
It's true. Like, look at this rock. In the middle of a frozen ocean, there is no value to that rock other than it is there. Like, there's no resources, there's no strategic value, it's just there. Like, it's pointless, it's worthless, and yet we fought over it, but not like you might think.
Look at this little island causing this rift that has removed America and Canada from an exclusive list together. I just want to go stand on that little island in
Again, it was Canada on that list, not the United States, because Mexico.
the center, right? And being half in Denmark and half in Canada and pout there, right on that border, and then go home.
Known as the Whiskey War. It was a very rare territorial dispute for both nations, and particularly for Canada, who also shares the longest international border in the world with the United States further to the south and the west, stretching for nearly 9,000 kilometers in length. From a more European perspective, that is a length of border equivalent to the distance between Portugal and Bangladesh.
Wow.
But despite this massive length, the border between the United States and Canada has been generally calm and peaceful for most of the past 2 centuries.
Mostly.
With few disagreements.
But there have been some.
The only notable disagreement that they have over land today is the maritime border between the 2 nations off the coast of the U.S. state of Maine and the Canadian province of New Brunswick.
Really? Maritime border. New Brunswick and the U.S.
That means the border of the water, yeah.
I'm going to have to learn more about this. Or maybe he'll tell us a little more about this.
Here, the Canadians insist that the maritime border between themselves and the Americans is here, while the Americans, conversely, insist that the maritime border is actually here.
Of course, of course. Oh, I wonder how much a difference that is.
Approximately 200 kilometers, I believe, and that's an estimate based on what I know about Turkey and Greece and their disputed maritime borders, which might lead to war. Yeah, I've actually got a list of nations that are on one side or the other of the upcoming, what I call resource wars, climate wars, or Third World War. I thought that the climate wars and the resource wars and the Third World War would actually be separate wars, but it's looking like they're all going to be accumulated into one. But only time will tell if I'm pessimistically correct or optimistically wrong.
It doesn't really matter all that much, save for a couple small islands that are stuck in between the 2 competing claims here. Machias Seal Island, home to a single controversial Canadian-built lighthouse and visited often by American tourist boats, and the even smaller and insignificant North Rock. Legally speaking, both the United States and Canada maintain overlapping claims of sovereignty to both of these uninhabited and meaningless islands.
Oh, wow. We both just like, that is ours. That is our lighthouse. And then if
Our lighthouse.
I guarantee you, if an American showed up at the lighthouse and a Canadian showed up, everyone would get along. No one's actually that angry over the lighthouse. At least I hope not.
Which means
I'm going to guess there are a few people that are angry about that, but people get angry that water makes them wet. So, people are going to get upset over anything, literally anything at all.
means that they sort of just exist in this weird legal gray zone. The final specks of the North American continent north of the Rio Grande that haven't yet been settled. But somehow even less significant and yet more controversial than these little islands is Hans Island, which for nearly half a century existed as a diplomatic thorn in the side of Canadian-Danish relations.
Well, not so much a thorn as maybe a splinter or a hangnail, right?
How... I understand the Canadian part of this, Hans Island, but how did Denmark insert itself into this?
With each claiming the entirety of the island for themselves. The conflict dates back to Canada's control over Ellesmere Island and Denmark's control over Greenland, and the narrow Nares Strait that flows in between them.
Oh, I didn't know Denmark controlled Greenland? When? Wow. Apparently a lot of stuff happened before I was born.
Yeah, who knew there were thousands of years of history before any one of us showed up on this earth? Whoa!
Go figure.
For most of history, the exact maritime border between the Canadians and the Danes here was legally undefined and generally assumed to be the strait itself. Because, well, it's a frozen wasteland where nobody actually lives permanently.
Yeah.
Right. Why are we... I was going to say, why are we people even fighting over this? But, you know, land is land, territory is territory. Nations are going to fight over that just on, principle alone.
Exactly.
Not really the practicality of getting to stomp around on your frozen wasteland. That's not the point. Right. Although maybe if you did conquer all of it, you would maybe stomp around on it a little.
Oh, and we did.
Just to prove your point further.
The closest actual permanently inhabited settlements are Alert in Canada 198 kilometers away, and Sararapaluk in Greenland 349 kilometers away. And
that means we're closer. Ah!
Huh. So some people actually do live up there. Wow.
They are collectively home to less than 150 people. This area was simply never really geopolitically important until in the 1970s, when people started figuring out that there could be valuable things like oil and natural gas in the area. And so in 1972, a team of both Canadians and Danes began working on the first legally defined maritime boundary between each of their big Arctic islands.
That's what it is. Once money is involved, get a little cheddar involved, suddenly everyone cares about splitting the maritime border correctly.
You know, whenever they say cheddar to refer to money, I just think like, ooh, I want cheese or mac and cheese, which I might actually do for a meal later today. I don't know. Well, I'll find out.
That makes a lot of sense.
They established 127 points of latitude and longitude across the Nares Strait, roughly in the center between Ellesmere and Greenland, and then drew a line between all of these points to formally mark out the border. But there was a small anomaly. Around here, the strait is only about 35 kilometers wide, and this speck of rock called Hans Island is pretty much dead in the center of it.
It's literally just a coincidence. It's just fate. Hans Island just happens to be in the dead center. That's the only reason. Otherwise one side could have just said this is clearly ours. Funny how that kind of stuff works out.
Which is why both the Canadian and Danish surveying teams each claimed it for their own respective countries. Unable to come to any kind of agreement, the 1970s-era maritime treaty between them simply left the border in the Nares Strait between points 122 and 123 blank, with Hans Island itself an undefined territory in the middle.
So, just to be clear, they drew a line, and where this island was, they just took the line away and said, oh.
Basically just decided to kick the issue of ownership over the island down the road for someone else to figure out at a later time.
Right. I don't blame them. It's like, no one really cared enough. So it was like, why get all worked up over it kind of thing. At some point in the future, maybe in 2022, we'll work this out.
But before then, we got a little worked up over it.
It's just that nobody at the time probably expected that a later time would mean about half a century and the collective efforts of 26 different foreign ministers. For
Oh, wow.
decades in between then and 2022, Canadian and Danish soldiers took alternating turns visiting the island and raising their own respective flags, taking down
So we show up on the island, we take down someone else's flag, we put up our own flag, and then
the other's flag and placing a bottle of their favorite national liquor. In 1984,
Oh, wow.
And this is how it got the name of the Whiskey Wars, because basically we'd show up, take down their flag, put up our flag, and then leave a Canadian whiskey bottle there. And be like, see, it's ours. And then they'd show up and be like, no, no, no. They'd take the whiskey bottle, take down the flag, put up their flag, and put one of their own whiskey bottles and say, there, this is ours. And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that was the war we had. It was the Whiskey War.
Well, this has been like a thing. Wow. Sending parties up there to take down the other flag, put up your flag. It's almost silly. It's almost like a game at that point.
Especially considering we're leaving a bottle of whiskey there for the opposing team to be like, look, this is our land. Enjoy the whiskey.
Where at least I don't think there was any military, like, actual fighting on the ground over this island.
True. And yet, it was military forces moving the flags and the whiskey.
It was almost like petty, like tearing down their flag and putting yours up and leaving a bottle just to rub it in their face. It's almost like a backyard game or something.
a group of Canadian soldiers visited by helicopter raised up their flag and left a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey for the Danes who they knew would come by later. And sure enough, the Danes did, by respectfully taking down and folding up the Canadian flag, raising the Danish flag, and replacing the Canadian Club whiskey with a bottle of their own Danish schnapps, along with a sign which simply read, "Welcome to the Danish island."
Okay, so it wasn't entirely whiskey, as I was led to assume, but the Danes left schnapps, which is wonderful and a great trade between the Canadian Club and the Danish schnapps. Canadian Club, by the way, is a very well-distributed brand of Canadian whiskeys.
It almost sounds like they're poking fun at each other at that point. Like it's all a big game and a joke.
Yeah.
Even though it kind of isn't, because it's kind of important. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of wholesome in a way.
And this is the way that most Canadians would like to have a war. Just a fun little, like, let's play a game kind of war. And that is our way.
This humorous process kept going back and forth for decades until it got a bit more contentious and a little less friendly in 2005.
Oh.
In that year, the Canadian Defense Minister at the time, Bill Graham, decided to set foot on the island personally to raise up the Canadian flag and assert his nation's sovereignty to it.
Oh.
Just 5 days after his visit, the Danish government filed an official protest to the Canadian government. While the Danish deputy
Did you see that headline said it was about our occupation of the island? we just put up a flag. It's like, I guess it's occupied now because a member of government has visited. That makes it more official than the military and a bottle of whiskey, I guess.
Premier of Greenland publicly stated that Hans Island had been occupied by Canada. Tensions were at an all-time high.
No, everyone was having fun for like decades, just having a fun old time, and then it had to go and become all serious.
Well, a little serious. Just a little.
But apparently this got resolved at some point, right?
And the Danes decided to send over this fearsome warship to the island to reassert Danish control.
I don't know, that looks like a fishing trawler to me.
But then, the
Okay.
prime ministers of both countries began to call for peace and calm.
Neither of those people were a Canadian prime minister.
And both the Canadian and Danish foreign ministers agreed to meet thousands of miles away from Hans Island in New York City to discuss the terms of diplomacy.
New York City because United Nations.
During that meeting, they essentially agreed to solve the matter diplomatically, but they each continued insisting that Hans Island was rightfully theirs in entirety. So, in practice, it didn't really go anywhere, although the Danish foreign minister did agree that he would cancel his ship's mission to the island.
Cancel the warship coming. My gosh, all this over a little island. But like I said, it's more about the principle of the matter than how tiny the island is.
And that he wouldn't take down the Canadian flag and rehoist the Danish flag. At least for a while. Beginning in 2012, there were renewed calls within both countries to solve the issue by simply splitting the island in half. And then, 6 years later from there, in 2018, they each announced a new joint task force to settle the border dispute once and for all, which was finally officially agreed upon another 4 years later, on the 10th of June, 2022, with roughly 60% of the island going to Denmark by extension of Greenland's own control, and the other 40% going to Canada's Nunavut territory. And
yeah, it's to the point where now Greenland is a thing. And was this in the news recently in Canada? I imagine it had to be.
Well, yes, which is why I was aware of this whiskey war and the funny story that it is. And just to clarify, the Canadian territory that owns 40% of that island is Nunavut. Not Nunavut, Nunavut.
This is like a funny kind of nice little show of respect between nations and the resolution of this really, really, really long contest over the island. So this is a very fun little story. I'm glad it didn't turn violent. Very glad.
Own control, and the other 40% going to Canada's Nunavut territory. And pretty much the only reason why it took so long to actually solve was that it was actually pretty convenient politically for both nations to continue keeping it unsolved. Canada and Denmark have been allies with one another for a very long time, and have enjoyed friendly relations for decades, going back to them each being founding members of the NATO alliance in 1949. If you pay closer attention to the actual dates when the Canadians and Danes made their highly publicized visits to the island, raising their flags and leaving behind their national liquor, they generally always took place soon before election season in each country. It was an easy method for both governments to just kick up some patriotic feelings and sentiments, right?
Oh man, that's interesting. That's such a interesting little subtle detail where they kind of liked how it was arranged, where they could both kick out each other's flag and raise their own, and it was almost agreed upon, like a little pact that was okay.
Hence the bottle of liquor.
To stir up like national pride during election season? That's funny. Okay.
Before an election that literally had no risk or downside at all. Both Copenhagen and Ottawa had obvious political incentives to keep dragging out the irrelevant conflict for decades. Especially once it was discovered that the island didn't have any resources, and any potential oil or gas nearby would probably be too expensive to drill and economically unviable. Hans Island was always politically valuable to keep contested. But then in 2022, it suddenly became politically valuable instead to actually solve it. In February, the Russians shocked much of the world when they decided to settle their border disputes with Ukraine by launching an enormous and bloody invasion with hundreds of thousands of troops.
So, the Russians ended our fun.
Culminating in the biggest war seen on the European continent since the end of World War II. That has already caused tens of thousands of violent deaths and millions of refugees, accompanied by a newfound...
Somehow, the war in Ukraine and Russia had to do with deciding to wrap up this little fun Hans Island.
Yeah, well, hey, we're having a border dispute and we're laughing and we're drinking and we're having fun, and they're having a border dispute and people are dying. So that kind of took the fun right out of our border dispute.
Global sense of uncertainty and fear for the future not seen since the end of the First Cold War. What better way for the governments of Canada and Denmark, two NATO allies, to place a spotlight on Russia's own military aggression in Europe by solving their own long-standing territorial dispute over Hans Island peacefully?
Okay. It was almost like a statement, an opportunity to make a statement, a really nice statement about the strength and unity of these two countries and NATO and stuff like that. Okay.
And like, look, we might be disputing this, but we can figure this out without shooting each other, blowing stuff up. You know, stuff can be two things.
I get it. That's nice.
The matter is all the more pressing to the Arctic members of NATO like Canada and Denmark, along with the United States, Iceland, and Norway, because in recent years, the Russians have been rapidly remilitarizing their region of the Arctic with airfields, radar stations, highly increased troop deployments, and even the presence of nuclear missiles and torpedoes.
You know, it's kind of cool seeing the globe from this point of view. I'm a little distracted. Seeing the Earth from the top like this gives you such a better idea of how close everything is to each other when you get on the top of the Earth, the north side of the Earth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just we don't travel that way because look at all that water. If something goes wrong with a plane that's flying over the North Pole, it doesn't have a safe place to land. And recovery and rescue become immensely more difficult with all the ice that's there. Plus, the wind stream doesn't assist you in traveling one way or the other.
It's actually really interesting to look at.
As the Arctic
Jet stream, that's what I meant to say. The jet stream, which is the air current that runs along the Earth based on the Earth's rotation.
continues to warm throughout this century, it will become one of the greatest arenas of conflict in the new 21st century Cold War between NATO on the one side and the Russians and Chinese over on the other. And looking forward into this inevitable future, keeping an unresolved territorial dispute open between two NATO allies within the Arctic, no matter how friendly and cordial, would have been an unwise decision geopolitically.
Wait, really? Is that really part of the thought process of this?
Yeah, I mean, stop the conflict, resolve peacefully, show that by leading by example, all these things, it was just the right time to do it for the right reasons.
That's kind of somber, solemn, literally a factor of ending this pretend dispute over the island.
Which is why I say it just took the fun right out of it.
Was to tie up any loose ends in regards to like prospects of future conflict and war. I mean, maybe that's a good thought to have if you're forced to think about that. Maybe that is a good thought, but it is a little sad.
And so, the time had finally come for Denmark and Canada to solve it once and for all, and formally become neighbors by land as well as by sea. After all, a lot of what's happening today are the consequences of what happened yesterday, last year, and even last century and beyond. Keeping up with current events is essential to your ability to understand the way our world works.
Advertisement.
And I get to do that every single day by reading all of the new short articles posted to Morning Brew.
Okay, I could tell he was segueing into an ad. All right, I think that's the end of the
Now, I think we could all tell, right?
video. Yeah, it is. Okay, this was by Real Life Lore. I gotta give that a like.
That's a good channel, tells great parts of history and stories you may not be familiar with. And one of their most recent videos to today, where I am recording this, has to do with Turkey and its disputes with its neighbors, which is a little disturbing because, well, the upcoming war.
That was so well done, so interesting, well presented. As a Canadian, I'm almost disappointed that our adorable little rivalry with Denmark is over.
Yeah.
Sad
Me too, but that's okay.
face. Yeah, it is kind of sad. As a Dane, I'm pleased to now be sharing a land border with such a friendly country as Canada. Oh,
And we love you too.
how nice. Hello there to our new Canadian neighbors from Denmark. Very nice. Very nice.
Oh, hello, Denmark from Canada. We should hang out and have a beer or something. Yeah.
I'm glad the whiskey war has finally ended. Is that what you could call it? The whiskey war. That's
Yeah.
kind of funny. uh, this is a historically significant. This is a historically significant since the Vikings were the first Europeans who arrived in the New World and the first to arrive in modern day Canada. Okay.
So if anything, it's like the same people went different ways and then started arguing over this rock.
Canadian. I find it really funny how it took us 50 years to resolve a border dispute over a useless rock. And now I'm glad we share a border with two countries. You know what? Fine. If you're so happy about it, fine. We'll accept it. You know, we liked being your one and only border buddy, the Americans, but you know, Denmark is cool too. You can come in. It's
Look. It's like if one person has one romantic partner and that one romantic partner has another romantic partner, the one is gonna be sad. So it makes sense that we got another. Oh, what am I doing here? It should be... Yeah.
It's fine. Anyway. Anyway, in all seriousness, this was a very interesting story. Never heard of this. Never knew about Hans Island. Never knew about this fun little dispute.
And like the story, I will always remember. The names and dates, I will forget. And hey, that's kind of like the way my brain operates. I might not remember your name if we meet. I might not remember when we met, but I will definitely remember everything that happened when we were together.
Pretend dispute. Fun little story. I enjoyed this. And now it's
Me
over.
too.
But I'm glad I got to learn about it. Anyway, if you're glad you got to learn about it with me as well,
Or you,
feel free to
glad
give this video a like
I was doing
or
that,
leave a
go
comment.
ahead.
And if you're
leave your
interested in more
thoughts.
videos like this,
I read them.
me reacting
or like
to
me
Canada,
reacting to him,
Canadian
reacting
culture,
to
things
us,
going
and
on in Canada
what we
that
do.
I've never seen
and
before, feel
it's
free
new.
to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Yes, thank you very much for watching. I have enjoyed this because this is a great story that I love, and I love Denmark, and Canada loves Denmark, and well, I guess that's about everything except for the French word of the day. Now, we're talking about a rock that has no resources, right? So, what's the French word I'm going to go with? Well, before we had this border, Denmark shared one border with Germany. So we're going to translate Germany. All right, so Germany is very interesting because they call themselves Deutsch, right? And we don't call them Dutch, we call them German. And in French, they call them something else. So Germany in French is Allemagne. Allemagne. It's strange, but it's true. Germany or Deutschland is really Allemagne. Thank you. Well, I guess that wraps up today's video, so thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this even a little bit as much as I enjoyed it, because I enjoyed this thoroughly. And, hey, I look forward to reading whatever you have to write, or not. You know, whatever. You do you. I'm not going to force you to do anything. I just hope you keep being awesome. Bye.
Science, spirit, life. Nerd Pumpkin.